Welcome everyone to episode 6 of the Flow Pro Show. We're glad you've joined us, and especially to those of us who may be new to those of you who may be new to the show. We're not new. We're really happy that you've joined us, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, each individually. I'm Sandy Yu.
And I'm at Laskowitz. Yeah.
Okay. And we together are at Flow Pro Show, and feel free to use the hashtag Flow Pro Show whenever you are tweeting about what we're doing here. And then this will be recorded and will be go up on our YouTube channel later today. So today we are really happy to have a special guest, Stephen Siciliano, who is the Principal Group PM Manager at Microsoft for Microsoft Flow. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Good, good. Could you just introduce yourself a little bit, what your role is exactly at Microsoft and kind of how you got there?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been working on Flow basically since we kind of conceived of the project. I had previously worked on Azure Logic Apps and some Azure services before that. And when we were working on Logic Apps, we realized there was this opportunity for taking the underlying technology that we had in Logic Apps and making it available for more people outside of Azure, so that way anybody could do automation. So I was part of the kind of the initial team. There were 6 of us who started this project back in 2015, and basically I've been leading the program management side of that since then. And I have an engineering counterpart, that's Raj, who maybe we can get to come to a show someday as well.
Definitely. That would be great. Okay, great, thanks. So we're going to do our regular segments that we always do, but we'll ask you to chime in probably on some of those.
Cool.
If that's okay. And then we'll get to the meat of our show today, which has to do with the upcoming licensing and pricing changes. Okay, so first, our Flow news. We always do a news segment where we talk about what's been new in Flow since the last time we had a show. And in this case, this was something that was on the detail. Most of the details are on a Power Apps blog post, but you had mentioned it, Stephen, in your July Flow updates, so that's why we've added it. Talking about a preview of build tools for both Power Apps and Flow, kind of in parentheses, because it seems like that's as part of solutions, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Okay, and I saw that there was a tutorial on doing that, which I've put a link to there on this slide. So that might be useful for those who are new to, I think it was a tutorial kind of generally on Azure DevOps, but
yeah, I think this link is actually the ALM lab that we did at Business Application Summit.
Oh, okay.
So there was a 2-hour, 3-hour lab that we did on the Power Apps build tools.
Oh, okay. So you did that?
I was one of the proctors there. So yeah, it was actually a lot of fun, and it was still really really immature then. Sorry, it was not that really stable yet, but you could see the real big benefit of it, so that you could build your own solution and deploy it to your own environment. And it's getting better and better, and still preview. So it's going to be even better. So yeah, that's something a lot of people have been waiting for, especially because it's totally integrated in Azure DevOps, and you can integrate it in your build and release pipelines, for instance.
Nice. Is there a projected date for GA? Do you know, Stephen?
I don't. I know that they're working hard on getting it there, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it'll be GA.
Okay. And do you know, have you seen people using it much yet? Do you know?
Yeah, I've already seen some people using it. I think one other thing to call out is the tutorials in these blogs are very Power Apps centric, but everything that is there is kind of equally applicable to everything inside of a solution. So you could build a solution with just flows, for example, and go through all of this DevOps pipeline using it just for your flow deployment. So we've seen people doing that, and there are things that are coming to make this more viable relatively soon. So one of the big ones, for example, is custom connectors inside of solutions. So that way you can, have a flow or a series of flows that use a custom connector or custom connectors, package them up, put them into your source control, and then deploy it through Azure DevOps. So that's something which will be available. Yeah.
Great.
And what I also saw was that was something that was in the release notes about the environment variables. Is that coming soon as well?
Yeah, so that'll be there for October as well. And environment variables, for those of you who don't know, allow you to basically separate out configuration into something that can be easily set on a per environment basis. So thus environment variables, the name, but it's like a variable, but it's at the environment level. So you could have a different SharePoint site or a different SQL table, depending on what environment your flow is in. And yeah, so that's coming soon as well.
Oh, that sounds really great. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another pretty new thing is guest access, which is in public preview currently. I guess that's still its state. And that is guest access for Flow, that is. And to use that, your guest users would need to be added in Azure AD and also granted some license that does include Flow. I was testing this out myself and found that I was able to do it with a Flow free license, but I think you only get 20 of those. So that's, not for enterprises, but, maybe for a small application. But what that lets you do, for example, is add a guest user to people who need to approve something in approvals. And it also supports the SharePoint connectors in the guest tenant, in the context of whatever the guest tenant is. And guests can even create flows, but they would, depending on what connectors they're using, would vary as to what context those are in. Like there was an example in the blog post that there's a link for there about if a guest user creates a flow that uses the Office 365 users, it's going to be the users from their own home tenant, correct? Whereas if it's something to do with approvals, that would be in SharePoint, those would be in the guest tenant where they're creating it. Anything else you want to add about that?
Yeah, that's right. And ultimately, our goal is that when you create the connections, you can actually choose which tenant the connection is created in. That's just something that is somewhat more complicated to build than just kind of defaulting it. So right now, for approvals in SharePoint, we're defaulting to the guest tenant, and for everything else, we're defaulting to the user's home tenant. But in the fullness of time, we hope to make it so that way you could actually choose.
Okay. I imagine that the adding guest users to approvals was probably one of the bigger asks for guest access in Flow, right?
That's exactly right, especially because guest is pretty commonly used inside of SharePoint. And since approvals are built directly into SharePoint, there were a lot of people who wanted to be able to use those out-of-box approval flows from those SharePoint lists or libraries.
Okay, so this then includes, and I didn't test this aspect, but this would include like the built-in page approval in SharePoint then? You could put that, I mean, I don't know why you would actually want to do that necessarily. I would see it more like approving documents or something, I suppose, that you'd want guests to be able to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, if you have contractors or vendors or something, I guess, I'm guessing. Okay, all right. So that's a nice addition.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were waiting for this because the only way to actually let external users approve something was I think it was sent email with options or something from the Outlook connector. And that's not really secure because when you forward that email, then somebody else can just click on the button and they will be able to register. Yeah, so it's not really sure that that person really approved or rejected. So yeah, this is something that's really more more structured than this one.
Okay, all right, great. We have a couple smaller authoring additions. So one is to be able to delete or rename actions even if they have dependencies. I mean, you have to be a little careful with deleting, especially, because then you'll have to go in and fix the things that it depended on. But renaming is great because I don't know about you, but oftentimes if I add an action to a flow and I forget to rename it something meaningful, or I change my mind about what I want to name it, then I haven't been able to in the past because it had other things. You know, I had already put the dynamic data tokens down in other steps, but here it's pretty cool because you rename the action and then automatically the subsequent dynamic data tokens and expressions get the dynamic data tokens, yes. The expressions I noticed, I'm not sure if that automatically gets updated or if, I don't think so
or in
either.
some cases.
But as long as if you're creating a new expression, then that new name is already in there. So yeah, I really like that one.
Yeah, I always regret renaming stuff beforehand when I'm working with expressions.
Yeah.
The other one, let's talk about the CDS part. So before you needed to, when you had flows running in CDS solutions, you had to disable your flow first, then edit your flow, and then enable it again. And that was kind of a hassle to do that. But now it's possible to actually edit them without needing to disable them first. So you can just edit your flow in the solution, and then you can change whatever you want, save it, and that's it.
Great. Okay.
So that's really easy.
Anything you want to add on those two, Stephen?
No, I mean, you mentioned there are still a few cases where expressions aren't updated, but for the most part, this is really good. And the editing and running flows in CDS, that was actually a change, a pretty deep change we had to make, because what we've done with flows in CDS is they leverage the existing workflow as kind of the base in the existing CDS classic workflows. And this is how they've always behaved for, I don't know, 10 years, however long it's been around. So, but now you can go and change them however you'd like.
Nice. Okay. Another new thing is the addition of the action center or action items, and that lets you get quickly to approvals or business process flows. So it's just mostly a UI change, right?
Yeah, I mean, the big change here is approvals got refreshed, which actually isn't that significant, but now business process flows, if you are assigned a business process flow, you can actually access that directly from inside of the flow portal. You don't have to build a model-driven Power App in order to access the business process flows that are assigned to you. So that's one of the big changes. So that way it's just much faster and easier to go to one place in the flow portal and be able to deal with all of the tasks or action items that are assigned to you.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. I see.
You can also see the BPF stage, right?
Yeah, I see.
So when when you're in a certain stage, you already see that you have arrived in that stage, for instance.
Yep.
So that's really good.
Okay. And then one last thing we just wanted to mention, but we're going to talk about this more deeply in the next episode, is the upcoming changes to the Office 365 Outlook connector, because the underlying technology is changing from the REST API to the Graph API, I think because the Outlook REST API is actually being deprecated. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I think the change has to be made. And so you can see just from this little screenshot from my flow that each of these Outlook connectors has, some of them are in preview yet, and some of them are just a higher version. So you'd want to use, well, depends on whether you have a policy on using preview things or not, but you want to move toward the new ones anyway, because at some point you're going to need to do that. So we'll talk about that more in detail and what all that entails next time.
Yeah.
Anything to add though right now? Okay.
No.
All right. Okay, then moving on to our community news, which is our other segment that we always have. Do you want to talk about this one, Dan?
Yeah. So John and Ed did a really cool video about approvals and group forms. I think it was actually Ed's first video with John.
I think so.
If
yes.
I'm correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, make sure to watch it. It's really a really good scenario which he's showing, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to see those all those business scenarios actually appear in those videos.
Yeah, because I think they went into a lot of interesting details that weren't only applicable to group forms, but just kind of general learning flow sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually more than half an hour long, so it's actually a pretty big video. So that's good.
Yep, lots of detail.
Yeah.
And I guess this is yours too.
Yeah, so I found this morning, actually, I found in the preview environment that the attachments have been added to the approvals. It's in my preview environment, and that's also maybe, yeah, it's kind of the bad thing, because approvals rely on CDS, and preview environments don't have a CDS, so I only saw the action, but I couldn't test it out. But I'm really looking forward to using this, because so many people would love to have this, and I've had so many customers ask for this, and yeah, it's always, yeah, you can work around it because you have the item link, of course,
right?
But to open it in the email is a lot easier, actually. So when you're in Outlook, you can also see a preview, I think. So when you get an email with the approval, then you can always select the file there, and then it opens the file next to an email like it normally does.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can respond to the approval when you actually have read the document.
That makes sense.
So that's kind of the thing I'm seeing, but I didn't really test it out, so I don't know actually what's also really nice about this. It's just attachment is being added to the approval email.
Okay.
But it's used for a lot of scenarios.
Okay. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. I think the one caveat I will add is there are limits on the size of attachments that can be sent in emails. Okay. So for Word documents and those types of things, this will work great if you have receipts attached to an approval that you need approval for. Like that all works really well. But if there are, and I don't remember exactly what the limit is, I think it might be.
Is it limited by the graph limit of 4 megabytes?
Yeah, I think it's 4 per attachment and 8 total or something like that. But there is, and it is a relatively low limit. So if you're sending around, like PowerPoint presentations, for example, that can, have video embedded in them, that will result in the attachment won't be showing up in the email, but you will be able to see it in the approval center, download it there, look at it when you click on the link from the email you get in your inbox.
Oh, okay. So it wouldn't cause the flow to fail either, for example.
Correct. Yeah, it'll work perfectly fine, and you can go to the approval center, take a look at the file. It just won't show up directly in your inbox.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Good to know.
Oh, that's nice, actually.
Great.
Okay. All right, well then let's move on. Oh, whoops. Yeah, we've got one more community thing, and that is the if you haven't yet registered for the Flow online conference, which I think is up to like 22,000 people now or something.
Yeah, something like that.
We are going to be the midday lunchtime thing. Our next Flow Pro show will be during the conference at 1 o'clock Eastern, and so whatever that is in your time zone, it will be our episode 7 actually during the conference. So hashtag FlowConf 2019, and the link at the bottom is, I don't know if you saw, but the kind folks at tyGraph have created a Power BI dashboard, as they do for lots of conferences, so that tweets get put on there and you can see how much activity there is, especially on the day. That'll be pretty cool.
Yeah,
because it's a whole day of great sessions. You can see the lineup when you go to that registration link.
Yeah.
Now, now we're going to talk licensing. So that's something that was announced a little while back, and there's been a lot of back and forth about it and things like that. But so we've asked Stephen to come on and give us some definitive answers. I've got a couple links there, which will take you to the Power Platform licensing, FAQ, request limits, so on, that went public today. And so basically, yeah, we just wanted to chat about that. Like maybe start off with a summary of what's changing, having to do with flow especially, and why, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of divide it into two categories. The first category is for standalone flow usage. So with flow, we used to have still today, technically, we have Flow Plan 1 and Flow Plan 2. And the difference between the two is mostly, a few features here or there. It isn't really super compelling to explain the difference between the two. And there's also other limits, like how frequently flows can run, those types of things. And one of the big challenges that we've heard from you all and basically from everybody is flow as a per user concept doesn't always make sense, right? If I have an approval process or a business process or an HR onboarding process that involves 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people in my organization, I can't possibly afford to pay $5 or $15 per person just to have them participate in that one process. Maybe it'll be only once per person that they'll ever have to do that approval process. So what we've decided to do is we now have two ways to purchase flow. There's a new per user plan that's very similar to what was included with P2 previously, that allows you to, as that user with that plan, create and run an unlimited number of flows. And there is now what we're calling a per flow plan. So instead of paying by the number of users, you can just pay a flat amount, which is $100. And then that flow can have 1 user, 1,000 users, 10,000 users, and all those people can use that flow to do whatever it is that they would like to do. So we think that this will be much more viable when you have these kind of broad processes that span an entire organization. But both plans have their place. It's not like one plan is better than the other. We think that if you have an organization where you want everybody to be able to create kind of as many flows as they want, the per user plan actually makes a lot of sense. But if you have a team or department that's creating one thing, that's really important, they can go get that per flow plan and just pay for that one flow or 10 flows, however many flows it takes to run that. One of the other things I want to call out, particularly in the per flow plan, because we got a lot of feedback on this from MVPs and the community, is if you have a flow that is exclusively called by another flow, that won't cost any money. So if you have one master flow that's doing a bunch of logic, but you have 10 child flows that do discrete pieces of logic as a part of that overall process, you only pay $100. You don't pay $1,000 or $1,100 because there's 11 flows.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's the kind of the big picture for flow as a standalone product that anybody can leverage.
Okay. And the flows, calling other flows, that's still included in standard connectors, right?
Yes. Yeah. So anybody will be able to have a flow that calls another flow. So today it is limited to HTTP, right, which that is premium, but right, we're rolling out as quickly as we can a feature where you can have a native call a child flow action.
Okay.
and it'll be able to just access any of the flows that you have in that environment, and it'll call it directly. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So if I understand it correctly, the per flow plan is actually for a whole business process, right? If it calls the flows from the master flow, then.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. However many flows you have that are kind of supporting that that main flow, it works as long as they're called from that. Now, if you have like 2 or 3 independent flows that work together to drive a business process, but they're not child flows, you would still need to pay $100 for each of those.
Okay. So recurrence, for instance, would be another flow. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I have go ahead, Sandy.
So even if they're sort of bundled into a solution, that's okay.
Right. Yeah. So if I have one solution, say that has 5 different daily reports that are super important reports, even though it's one solution, if those are 5 independent flows doing independent things, then that's $500
Gotcha.
For that overall solution.
Okay.
The one other thing to mention is there is a minimum purchase requirement on the per flow plan. So it starts at $500, which gets you kind of 5 flows to start with. And then it's just $100 for each additional flow beyond that.
Okay. But there's not a minimum for the per user plan.
Correct. Yeah. So that was another thing, depending on how close you paid attention. We did originally have a minimum user cap on the flow per user plan as well, but we got a lot of feedback that would break smaller organizations or organizations that didn't need that number. So we actually eliminated that. So you can buy one if you'd like, and just pay $15 and go from there.
Okay, so that especially helps with doing proofs of concept and things like that, I think, too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and specifically with regards to doing proofs of concept, the other option that is out there is the community plan, which does give you the full set of functionality, but it is limited to, you can't share or collaborate in the community plan. Ironic for the name, but it's for people in the community, not for, exactly.
Right.
But that's another way, so you don't even have to pay $15 if you just want to try something out, do a proof of concept for yourself. You can use the community plan for that.
Oh, okay. All right. That's good to think about. Okay.
Cool.
Did you want to?
Yeah,
go ahead.
So I guess the other change is with the flow that's included with other offerings. Okay. So that's flow in Office or Power Apps or Dynamics. And the change that we're doing there is really making sure that the flow capabilities that are included with those other offerings are really in support of what you're doing in those offerings. So very concretely, if we take the example of Power Apps, historically, the way it's worked with the Power Apps Plan 1 and Plan 2 licenses is you basically just get all flow functionality. So it's the same as the flow licenses 100%. But the change that we're doing is with the new Power Apps plans, you will be able to build and run flows that use the same data sources that your Power Apps do, or that are triggered by or send a notification to the Power Apps that you have. Okay. So it still has to be the same kind of types of things you're doing with your apps. If you connect to a SQL database from your Power App, you can build a flow that triggers off that SQL database as a part of your overall solution. But if you also want a flow that listens to events in MailChimp and adds them to Salesforce, that's not related to that Power App, for that, you will need to buy a flow license.
Okay, that's with the standalone ones you're talking about.
That's right. Yep. Because Salesforce is a premium connector, so you need to do that. So that's the change for Power Apps, and it's basically the exact same thing for Dynamics. If you build a flow that uses any of the data that your Dynamics apps use, you're good to go. The change for Office is a little bit different. We've observed that a lot of people are using the Office license and they're kind of using Azure as a bridge to connect out to other enterprise applications that they've developed. So with the Office licenses, what we will end up doing is for new Office customers and new flows starting in October, the Azure connectors as well as the Dynamics connectors will be considered to be premium connectors. So at that point, you will need to, if you're building a Power App, you can get a standalone Power Apps license, or if you're building flows, you can either pay the flat $100 for a single flow or per user to build out your solutions that use any of those Azure services to build automation inside of your organization.
Okay.
And
I mean, I think in
existing ones?
Yeah, so existing flows or existing apps, they will continue to work until, I believe, October 1st, 2024. So it's 5 years for anything that's out there, which hopefully should be enough time for people to
migrate.
or be doing something totally different. Who knows what we'll be doing in 5 years?
Exactly.
We'll have it all in front of our faces, or something. Who knows?
That's like 25 years.
I know, right. Well, so I think sometimes a lot of people are using things like HTTP to do things, say, in SharePoint that there aren't actions for. So
so the
so
SharePoint
connector.
to add. Yeah, so the SharePoint connector, which is not a premium connector, actually just has an action where you can call any SharePoint API. So you don't need to use the premium HTTP connector to do anything inside of SharePoint. That's included with your Office license, and that's not changing.
Okay, great. And at this point, what kind of differences, or what would you say about Flow versus or with Logic Apps? What's the difference, or
so? Yeah, I mean, the way I like to talk about it is Logic Apps is about B2B system integration. Connects to enterprise services. It has the ability to use BizTalk and things like Edifact and XML schemas and those types of things to really do these very heavyweight, I need to import, millions of orders in a CSV from an FTP server and send that out to my other systems that I have inside my organization. So that's really where Logic Apps excels, and Logic Apps has a lot of tooling like the integration account that help you to enable those scenarios. With Flow, our focus is a little bit different because we're really focused on automation that end users can participate in. So that's why we do things like approvals. Approvals is really important for Flow because people can handle them in their inbox. We have the mobile app. They can go to the approval center or the action center inside of the Flow website, and they can participate in these processes as end users and organizations. None of that exists inside of Logic Apps because Logic Apps is a purely back-end technology. And it's the same thing with Flow, we also have the notifications to the Flow mobile app, so you can send notifications to people. We can integrate with Power Apps, which again is a end user facing thing where you have people inside an organization leveraging Power Apps and Flow together. So that's really the big difference we see is it something that's purely about kind of back-end business to business integration versus is it something where an end user would participate in the process? They don't have to necessarily build the process or be aware really of how that process works. But if you have people doing approvals, they need to have an end user facing experience, and that's what Flow adds on top of Logic Apps.
Okay.
So if you have like service account scenarios, would that typically fit more in Logic Apps side?
I'd say it really depends on what you want to do. There's a lot of approval scenarios where you may actually have system accounts that are, or service principals that are doing updates in your various databases based on what a user does. So the capabilities of Logic Apps and Flow there are actually identical. If you want a service account, you can build it just as easily inside of Flow as you can inside of Logic Apps. So I wouldn't say that actually is a big differentiator between the two. It's really more kind of what is the scenario you're trying to accomplish, not so much how do you sign into the connectors.
Well, so is there any effect on people who are using service accounts? And I don't know if this was what you were meaning, Daniel. Then would they need to have a per user Flow license for that service account?
Yeah. So today, and this this is kind of independent of the changes that we're doing in October. In order to use Flow, a service account would actually need to be licensed. So if you go, for the past 2 years, and people were out there licensing their service accounts with, Microsoft 365 E3 or E1, Office 365, in order to be able to have them drive processes. But now with the per flow plan, you actually don't need to have any licenses for these service accounts. So if you do have a process that you want to be owned by a service account, you don't need any licenses because you pay for the flow. You don't pay for the users who are building or running the flow. So you can just pay flat $100 or for however many flows you have. And it doesn't matter if all of the pieces there are service accounts, it'll still work.
Oh, okay. That's good, I think. And I know, the objective is also, as I understood, was to try to simplify things. Do you feel like at this point, the new, the upcoming changes are going to be simpler for people as far as being able to explain to people? Maybe new people. Yeah,
I think for people who we have to explain both the old and the new model simultaneously, it definitely may not appear to be simpler. But we think going forward, by not having P1 and P2 and explaining that difference, by being clearer that, hey, if you're doing standalone flow scenarios, you really need to have a flow license. That should simplify the conversation, because basically the conversation will boil down to how many users and how many flows do you have. And it's just the crossover point of, if you have a whole lot of users and a small number of flows, then pay per flow. It's very easy. If you have a large number of flows, but a small number of users, pay per user. And there's, I don't remember the equation off the top of my head, but basically there's just a crossover point where one is cheaper than the other. And people can just, do that 7th grade algebra equation, and they can figure out where those two lines cross.
Yeah. That should make a really nice slide, actually.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, who's good at math?
So, yeah. There is something in the new model, like there's no runs anymore, like there's no 2000
Yeah, I'd like to hear about
runs.
That.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we heard about was it's kind of confusing. Specifically the frequency limitations are confusing because they don't actually apply to all types of flows, and we don't really talk about that. Hey, it says your flow runs every 15 minutes, but I have this flow that's running every 1 minute. How is that possible? And the answer is because there are different types of triggers that actually can go faster. So this was causing a lot of kind of confusion. The other change, so basically what we did is we've kind of removed all of the flow frequency limitations. So a flow can now run basically as fast as the connector can handle. That doesn't mean, just to clarify, that every flow can run every minute, because different connectors do have capabilities on their side about how fast they can push events to us. But for connectors that can run every minute, if you have an Office flow, or even if you're using flow free, the flow can trigger every minute now. So that's on the frequency front. On the runs front, the problem there was we were pooling all of the runs together at the tenant level. So people were running into these scenarios where one user or a small number of users were eating up all of the organization's run quota. And we do have a dashboard you can go to where admins can see and be warned about this, and they can get a nice little report that shows all of the flows that have run and who's run them. But it kind of turns into a governance issue where you have to be kind of very aware of exactly where your runs are being allocated. And we kind of just wanted to get out of this business of having this kind of tenant pool that people were afraid that they could impact other people, or, not even intentionally many times. In fact, what we found is the cases where that's happening, it's almost universally an accident. like nobody is trying to create a flow that runs 1 million times a day. Like it's just, oh, I
Right.
created an infinite loop. The flow checker warns you, but you can still do it if you really want to. And they just, running 1 million times a day, and that was eating from that quota. So what we've done is, as of October 1st, there's no longer these flow level limitations on frequencies, and there's no longer the tenant level quotas for runs. But there is one important thing that we're doing in addition to that, which is so today, there are limits on how many actions a given flow can do in a 5-minute period. So these are throttles that are documented on the, there's a limits page that we have for flow. And that is actually, there are different limits depending on what plan you're on. So Flow P2 users today get more actions in 5 minutes than Flow Office 365 users.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so that's something that exists today. But what this limit is good at doing is it's good at throttling users who have like bursty patterns of activity, who suddenly like go do something, and then it dramatically increases the number of actions that they have in the service. And what it doesn't do though is it doesn't, if you don't quite hit that 5-minute threshold, but you still have a high volume of activity sustained over a period of time, those limits don't catch that. So we are introducing, in addition to the current burst limit of 5 minutes, we are introducing a new sustained limit, which is a 24-hour limit on the number of actions that you can do. And these limits are really intended to only catch those very small percentage of users who accidentally created a flow that has an infinite loop, or created a flow on a incredibly noisy Twitter handle,
Right.
and that flow has a loop inside it that goes and searches 100 things. These types of super edge case scenarios. So we actually have designed the limits for each of the plans such that more than 95% of users will never hit the limit for this new 24-hour sustained throttle that's being put in place. So that's,
and those throttles help protect the rest of the system, really, right?
That's exactly right.
The purpose of them. It's not like you're being mean.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And the goal of this is definitely just to ensure that the service can handle the sustained volume of load from all the users. Because if you think, there's like over 100 million Office 365 users out there, right? So if, not saying this would happen, but if tomorrow, half of them decided that Flow was awesome because they watched this cool Flow Pro show, it could happen. It's just like, it wouldn't be possible for us to handle the, all of them doing, hundreds of thousands of actions per day. We execute billions of actions per day, but we couldn't do, hundreds of millions or trillions of actions per day, at least not without changing the way things work. So, so that's really why these limits are in place. But the converse of the fact that 95% of users aren't impacted does mean there is a small number of users who may potentially be throttled now. Are based on analyzing usage behaviors. Even the majority of these it's accidental. It's not intentional. But if you are in that place where you just really need to do a huge number of actions and it is business critical, we are introducing a new capacity add-on in October that will allow users to increase their throttles pretty much as much as they need to within reason. And this means that if you do have a business critical scenario, you as a user, you can get this added on, and it will increase your limits for whatever scenarios you need. And basically, specifically the way it works is it increases it in chunks of 10,000 actions per day. So if you need 100,000, you can get 10 of these, add them on, and then you can do 100,000 in one day, every day of every month of every year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions.
I just wanted one Can I just ask one thing
Yeah,
before we
sure.
leave this topic?
Yeah.
So will these limits be surfaced in some way in the admin portal? Also?
Yes, so there's a few things we're doing. So at one of the links on your slides, those limits are now documented in the docs page,
Okay.
so at least you can go see that. And we are working on both in the admin portal, giving admins visibility about the kind of the volume of activity that users are hitting, both for, hey, are they hitting that burst 5-minute throttle, or are they hitting the 24-hour sustained throttle? And we are planning on adding that same reporting into the Flow Maker portal. These won't likely be ready on 10.1, but they will be coming later this year, so that way you can get that better visibility.
So each user can see how close they are to their limit, or how they're using that. Okay.
Yep.
Very nice.
Okay.
So Ed actually asked a question about the number of API requests. Is that number of actions per connector or across all of them? So I think that's all of them, right?
Yeah, so the throttle that's in the Flow service is across all of the actions. There also are still, and these aren't going away, for each connector, if you go to the connector documentation page, there are limits there as well. And different connectors have different limits. So like Twitter, for example, even has different limits for reads versus writes. Like, it doesn't really matter if I get a bunch of tweets from a search, but I think you can only post like 1 or 2 tweets a minute or something. And that's a limitation that's enforced by Twitter. So we try to set the limits in the connectors rather than letting Twitter handle it themselves. So those limits will continue to exist. There's no immediate changes happening there. This new 24-hour sustain limit that we're introducing, that is across all of the actions that exist inside of Flow.
Okay.
Yeah. Another question we got is from Vivek, and he asks about the community plan. Does the licensing change affect the community plan in any way? Basically, what I'm asking is, can we still try out crazy things on our individual community plans?
So the only difference for the community plan is that there will be these API limits that are going in place. The use rights of the community plan aren't changing. So that does mean, I don't know how crazy the crazy things you're doing are, but if you're doing millions of API calls per day, you may now be throttled even on the community plan.
Yeah. Well, you said something about a Twitter scenario with a lot of runs. Well, I kind of thought that you maybe looked into my Flow runs, because I once created a Flow for a demo, and I did #Trump as a search query,
no.
and I did sentiment analysis on it, and I forgot to turn it off. So within an hour, I got an email from Azure that I went through all my credits. So that was really fast.
Yep.
And yeah. Okay, we got one more question.
Well, actually, we had Geeta's was back a ways. She was asking about the SQL Azure connector that's moving from standard to premium. And so I think we touched on that a little bit, but maybe specifically for that one, I think it's true that if you have existing flows that are using that, then those get grandfathered for 5 years, right? Yep. But if you have create flows or have users who use that connector up until October 1st, right? Then it gets grandfathered for a year. Is that,
yeah. So basically there's two levels of grandfathering. There is for the flows themselves, that's 5 years. And then any organization which has any user who has used any of the connectors that are being reclassified, all of the users of that organization can continue to build new flows that use these connectors for 1 year, or if you have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, until the end of your enterprise agreement, which enterprise agreements often could be like 3 years. So it may actually be 3 years for your organization if you have a longer EA. an important detail there, though, is for new flows created after October 1st, those won't be grandfathered for 5 years. So it's not like, you can go in 364 days and create a bunch of flows, and then those are grandfathered for another 5 years, right? It's for all the existing flows as of October 1st, 5 years. And we're also giving basically a 1-year grace period for any user in any organization that has that's used this at all, and they can get another year. But those new flows they're creating, they should have a line of sight to either switching them to to SharePoint or something that is a standard connector, or getting one of the flow licenses that give them access to those connectors.
Okay, that seems reasonable.
So, yeah, so you will be kind of boosting consultancy services for the next month, right?
It's one way to look at it.
Well, I like it.
Good.
There was another question from Serge. He said, will this add-on, and he was talking about the add-on for the capacity, I think. Will that also be available for Office 365 licenses?
Yes. So the add-on can be added to any user or a flow that is part of the per flow license, because the per flow license, since there is no user who is the necessary license for it, the capacity is actually dedicated to that flow. So if I have 100 flows, but I license one of them with my per flow license, I can be guaranteed that that per flow license flow continues to work, irrespective of what I'm doing with my other flows. But the answer specifically to the question, yes, any user, Office 365, Power Apps, Dynamics, or the flow per user plan can get additional increases in their limits.
All right. Okay. Any other questions you can think of, or anybody else in the chat have any questions? Now's your chance.
Yeah.
No, maybe not. Okay. No, do you have anything else that you want to add, Stephen, to wrap up? But then we'll just wrap up.
No, I mean, just to summarize real quick, I think our goal with this has been that going forward, things are a bit clearer and simpler. We understand that kind of part of this transition, things may seem a little confusing, and we want to work with you to get through that period of time, and hopefully we can move forward post October with something that makes sense for everybody. And we're really excited in particular about the ability to pay per flow. We think that hopefully that will enable organizations to do much broader adoption of flow without having to worry so much about all those users. So yeah, okay. Hopefully it'll all work out.
Where's the best place for people to go if they have questions about specific scenarios or something like that?
So in the links you have in the deck, there's an FAQ, which hopefully covers the top scenarios. There is also, we're obviously on the community. So if there are questions that aren't covered in the FAQ, feel free to reach out to the community, and we will be monitoring that and answering any questions that you may have there as well.
Okay. All right, great. Yeah, so we'll be, the slides, of course, will be included in the recording that'll be on our YouTube channel, and we'll include the links in the description of today's episode so people can follow those.
Great.
Okay.
All right.
So thanks a lot for
thank you so
talking
much.
About everything. Oh, one thing. Oh. Giva's question. Last minute, she's asking a question. What's the next big, super useful feature we should look out for? Like copy paste.
Yeah, so we had
someone is a fan of copy paste.
Sunai came on a couple of months ago and demoed copy paste for us, and everybody was really excited about it. And then now, of course, you have it. But yeah, so what's something else that we can tempt people with?
Copy paste was such a big one. I don't know if I'll be able to top that. I mean, I think the ability to have flows call other flows natively. Without dealing with HTTP and copy pasting, and I think that's going to be a big one that will really help users out. So
that's everybody seems to agree, I think.
child flows. That's right. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So thanks again, and be sure to tune in on September 10th for the big Flow online conference all day long, beginning at 9 a.m. Eastern. So yeah, it's very early for you guys out there on the West
6
Coast.
a.m. Yep.
Yeah, and goes all day. It starts from beginner all the way up through pretty advanced. So I think, I think Shane is the beginning to kick it off, and I think John Liu's probably at the very end because he's always very advanced. And so, yeah, thanks everybody for joining, and look forward to seeing you next time. And thanks again, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay,
Bye.
Bye-bye.